My name is Eleanor Thompson, and I'm 65 years old. I never thought telling my story would be so painfully difficult, but I'm doing it because maybe, somewhere out there, there's someone who understands what it's like to love immeasurably and be rewarded with oblivion. My grandson was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me. I held him in my arms from the time he was just 2 years old, when his mother disappeared without a word. His father, my son, was away at work all day and hardly saw him. So, it was me who raised him, me who taught him to talk, to walk, to live. These were 5 years of pure love, sleepless nights when I cared for him with a fever, bedtime stories, breakfasts with sweet pastries, and laughter that filled the house. He called me mommy in his little voice, which broke my heart. With each passing day, I felt he was more mine than anyone else's. I wasn't just his grandmother, I was his refuge, his whole world. I never complained. I gave up outings, friends, even work, all for him. And I did it happily, believing we were building something eternal. But one day, everything changed. As if from nowhere, his mother appeared, dressed in expensive clothes, with assurances that she had matured and was ready to be a real mother. I stared into her eyes, trying to decipher her intentions. I didn't want to hurt her, because I understood how important it was for a child to have a mother. Not wanting to argue, I only begged her not to take my son away from me forever, to allow me to see him, to hug him at least occasionally. She smiled, but it was an empty, expressionless smile, filled with something I couldn't recognize then. Contempt. Gradually, she began to distance him from me. First, she stopped bringing him over, then she stopped answering calls, and then she blocked me everywhere altogether. I tried to find him at school, but he had already been transferred to another one. I turned to my son for help, but he just shrugged. She's his mother, Eleanor Thompson. I can't do anything. At that moment, the realization pierced me, I am alone. They are taking away the child I raised as a son. And the worst part is, no one seems to see how cruel it is. From the first day of her return, I had an uneasy feeling. And it wasn't just her detachment and cold words. She looked at her son as if she didn't recognize him, as if those 5 years had never happened. The little one didn't call her mommy, he saw her as a stranger. At first, he clung to me, hid behind my skirts when she approached, and I quietly explained to him that this was his mother, that he should love her. What irony! It was me who taught him to love her. But soon he began to distance himself. It will be better for the child, so he doesn't get confused, she declared one afternoon. He needs to get used to it. She forbade me from calling him my little one and asked me not to hug him so tightly in her presence. I agreed, even though my heart was breaking. I thought that if I showed understanding, she would act fairly, but that didn't happen. She took my calmness as permission to gradually erase me from his life. She pushed me into a corner, as if my love was a threat. A month later, she no longer allowed me to see him alone. I could only visit him when she decided, and for only a few minutes. She said he had a routine, activities, responsibilities. I remained silent, swallowing tears. I brought toys, read stories, even made his favorite dessert, but with each meeting, his gaze became more and more extinguished. He no longer ran to me with hugs. Confused, insecure. That's when I realized the terrible truth. They weren't just distancing me from him, they were teaching him to forget me, tearing him away from the love I had given him. But what finally crushed me was the day I saw him with her on the street and went to say hello. He lowered his eyes and hid behind his mother. She scorched me with a look and whispered, like venom, "Don't look at her, she's nobody." At that moment, it felt like my soul was being torn out by the roots. I realized that there was no place for me, not even in his memory. I walked home with trembling legs, not so much from sadness as from powerlessness. How is it possible that a person you raised, putting your whole soul into it, now means nothing? After that meeting on the street, something inside me broke forever. It wasn't just pain, it was a feeling of loss, equivalent to death. The child I raised with such tenderness no longer existed, or at least, he became unattainable for me. Dreams about him became my obsession. I saw him running towards me, arms outstretched, and shouting, "Mommy, Eleanor Thompson." I woke up in tears, with my chest constricted, and sheets soaked with sweat. It wasn't just the departure of a child, it was the departure of my reason for living. I tried to be strong, as always. I clung to the hope that time would put everything in its place. I convinced myself that when he grew up, he would remember me, my stories, my songs, how I healed his scraped knees with kisses and ointment. I started writing him letters, one a week. I used to tell stories about my life, the meals I cooked, the flowers blooming in my garden, but there was no one to send them to. So, I kept them in a wooden box with his name hand-carved on it, Ethan Miller. Meanwhile, loneliness became my constant companion. The walls of my house, once echoing with laughter and the sounds of toys, were now silent. I would spend hours in my rocking chair, gazing out the window, imagining I could see his silhouette. Sometimes, I would hear children's voices outside and rush out with my heart pounding, but it was never him. No one ever asked how I was doing. My son remained distant, and whenever I tried to broach the subject, he would immediately change the conversation. "Don't dwell on the past, Mom," he would snap. I began to wonder if I was exaggerating, if I was just a stubborn old woman who couldn't let go. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. It wasn't about ownership or wounded pride, it was about love, the kind of love that asks for nothing in return, only the chance to be near. Is it a crime to want to see the child you raised? Do all those years given, sleepless nights, and embraces mean nothing? Every night, I prayed for one thing, that Ethan Miller wouldn't forget me, that one day, just once, he would remember me. One Sunday afternoon, I mustered all my courage and went to the house where they now lived. I carried a banana pie, Ethan Miller's favorite. I just wanted to see him, even for a minute. With trembling hands, I knocked on the door, hoping he would answer, but it was his mother. She looked down at me with a smile that held no warmth. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. I held out the pie to her, like a white flag. "I just wanted to give this to Ethan Miller." She didn't even glance at it. "He's not here," she said curtly, and without another word, she slammed the door in my face. That evening, I couldn't eat. My heart felt like a clenched fist. I wondered if he really wasn't there, or if she just didn't want me to see him. I could painfully imagine him standing behind that door, perhaps hearing my voice and feeling ashamed that he couldn't come out. Maybe his mother had already told him that I had left, that I had abandoned him. I don't know, but I suddenly realized that there was a whole campaign underway to erase me from his memory, as if I had never existed, as if those 5 years were a mistake that needed to be corrected. A few days later, I received an unexpected message. It was from a neighbor I had known for many years. I saw Ethan Miller in the park. He's taller and thinner, but just as sweet. He asked if I had seen you. This simple message was like a ray of sunshine after a storm. He remembers me? He's still looking for me? I burst into tears, like a child. For the first time in months, I felt something akin to hope. He hasn't forgotten me, and as long as that memory lives in him, I won't give up. I've decided, I'll write another letter, but this time not to keep hidden away. I'll put it in our favorite book of fairy tales and leave it at the bookstore next door. I asked the owner, so that if she ever sees him with his mother, to give him the book silently. I don't know if it will work, but at least it's an attempt. If I can't hug him, then at least he'll know one thing, I never stopped loving him and I'm still waiting here. Weeks dragged by in agonizing silence, but every Thursday I unfailingly went to the bookstore, as if it had become a sacred ritual. I pretended to browse the books, but in reality, I was looking for any sign. The owner, Mrs. Abigail, already knew me well. Sometimes she would offer me coffee and say with a quiet sadness, "They weren't here today either." And I would smile, so as not to cry. I clung to the thought that at some point this book with my letter would fall into his hands. And maybe he'll feel that he still has someone who loves him and waits for him. Meanwhile, my body rebelled, demanding payment. Sleepless nights, the bitterness I kept in silence, memories that hurt more than a blow. One morning I woke up with a racing heart and dizziness that knocked me down in the bathroom. I was taken to the hospital. High blood pressure, accumulated stress, the doctor stated, prescribing rest. But how can you soothe a wounded soul when you live with nothing but emptiness? I felt invisible, as if my existence no longer meant anything to my family or the world. Returning home, I found a box of letters. The very one where I kept everything I couldn't say out loud. I opened it and began to read in a low voice. In one of the letters, "Today you cried because of a broken robot. I fixed it with tape, and you said I was your hero." In another, "Today you got sick and fell asleep on my chest. I brought down your fever with cold compresses and affection." And so, letter after letter, I relived every moment. It wasn't a figment of my imagination, an exaggeration. I raised him, shaped him as a person, was his mother when no one else wanted to be. That day I made a decision. I was going to officially document everything I had experienced with Ethan Miller. I consulted a friend who works as a social worker. I told her everything, and she listened with eyes full of sympathy, saying, "Eleanor Thompson, you were his primary attachment figure. That has value. Maybe you can't fight to see him as a grandmother, but as a caregiver, you can. I don't know how this will end." But for the first time in a long time, I felt that my story wasn't just pain, it was also evidence of love. The day I took all the documents to the law office, it felt like I was walking with my soul in my hands. Photos, drawings, medical prescriptions in my name, records from school where I was the emergency contact, even his baptismal certificate where I was listed as the responsible godmother. The young lawyer who received me carefully examined everything. "This is much more than I imagined, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson," she told me. "You weren't a casual visitor in his life, you were his home." Those words shook me to my core. Finally, someone saw it. She explained that in the United States, it's not easy to fight for visitation rights if you're not a mother or father, but there's such a thing as family fellowship based on proven attachment. I could try, without taking anything away from his mother, but asking for the right to see him 1 or 2 days a month. It was little, but for me, it was a whole world. I didn't hesitate to sign the papers, not out of revenge, but out of love, because I didn't want to die without knowing how long I had waited for him. Soon after, my son came to visit me, not of his own volition, but because the child's mother was furious. She yelled that I was interfering in matters that didn't concern me, that I wanted to steal her child. He asked me to give it all up. Said it was better to leave things as they were, for the sake of peace. I replied with a firm heart, "Peace is not built on silence and renunciation." He looked at me with strange eyes, as if he didn't recognize me. "You're not the same mom anymore," he said. And yes, that was true. So much had been taken from me that there was no room left for silence. That night, I lit a candle in front of a photo of Ethan Miller that still stood on my bedside table. I promised him that this fight wasn't for me, but for him. So that when he grows up and starts asking himself questions, he has a tangible truth. So that he knows that I waited for him, searched for him, loved him unconditionally. And if one day he knocks on my door with eyes full of doubt, I will be there, with open arms and an unbroken heart. Several months have passed since I started the lawsuit, and although everything seemed to be moving slowly, something inside me began to breathe differently. I was no longer just an invisible grandmother. Now I had a voice, even if only on sealed papers and cold hearings. I received the first invitation to a psychosocial evaluation. They wanted to know how justified my request was, whether my relationship with the child really made sense. I sat in front of a young female psychologist who asked me to speak from the heart, and I did. I told her about the stories, the breakfasts, the hugs after nightmares. She barely took notes, just listened to me. But her eyes filled with tears when I told her how he called me Mom Eleanor Thompson and fell asleep clinging to me. She said that many children raised by grandparents form a stronger bond than with their own absent parents. She thanked me for sharing and added, "Although it may not seem like it, what you're doing is also motherhood." I left there with a feeling of recognition, not from the system, but from something deeper, a confirmation of my truth. But not everything was rosy. A few days later, I received a legal document from Ethan Miller's mother. In it, she accused me of wanting to emotionally confuse the child, that I was an obsessive figure and created instability. I read it with a broken heart. She called me dangerous, as if my love was a threat. I cried without shame, not because of the words, but because they came from someone who knew me, who had allowed me to raise her son for 5 years, and now treated me like a stranger with dark intentions. But when I was about to give up, the phone rang. It was the woman from the bookstore. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. I don't know how to tell you this, but Ethan Miller came in today. He walked in alone, saw the book, picked it up, without saying a word to anyone. He recognized it. My heart stopped in my chest. He read it? I whispered in a trembling voice. I don't know, but he picked it up. I closed my eyes, a mixture of fear and faint hope swirling in my soul. If he read that letter, if even one line touched his heart, then all is not lost. From the moment I found out that Ethan Miller had picked up the book, I lost my peace. Every night, I imagined his gaze drifting across these words, written with love and despair. Did he understand that they were addressed to him, that this trembling handwriting was mine, that every word was born from the memories we had created together? Without even realizing it, I began to see the world with a new spark in my eyes, as if a part of me had finally stopped screaming into the void. But the calm was short-lived. A few days later, I received a warning. Ethan Miller's mother, enraged by what had happened, stormed into the bookstore and caused a scene. She shouted that she wouldn't tolerate some obsessed woman hanging around her son and threatened to sue me for harassment. The owner of the store, though sympathetic, asked me not to come in for a while. I'm so sorry, Eleanor Thompson, but this is for your own good. There was genuine regret in her voice, but the decision was firm. I left there, feeling exiled from yet another corner where hope had flickered. Another door slammed shut, another place became inaccessible. Returning home, I opened the box of letters and added another one. Today we were separated even further, but I'm still here, waiting, as always. The words flowed onto the paper with bitterness and unwavering faith. Then I sank into an armchair and opened an old notebook, in which I had begun to record everything for him. Not knowing if he would ever read these lines, I wanted to leave him a legacy, a testament to the fact that he had not been abandoned, that he had not been swallowed by the abyss of oblivion, but that he was loved with such strength that neither distance, nor silence, nor cruelty could erase that connection. I wrote, pouring a piece of my soul into every word, as if trying to reach him through time and space. That same night, a notification arrived from the court. My application for co-guardianship had been officially accepted for consideration. A hearing was scheduled. My hands trembled. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was an opportunity, a real chance to see Ethan Miller again, without hiding, without excuses. My heart pounded in my chest, filling me with both fear and hope. Images of our future meeting flashed through my mind, and I couldn't help but smile shyly. I closed my eyes, pressed my hands to my chest, and prayed as I hadn't prayed since childhood. I asked God for one thing, to return just one of his hugs. Just one. With it, I could breathe again. The week leading up to the hearing crept in like a quiet storm. I woke up with a wildly beating heart and spent my days mentally rehearsing everything I wanted to say. I wasn't seeking revenge, I wasn't trying to escalate the conflict, I just wanted to be heard, to be understood, that I wasn't a stranger, that I wasn't interfering in someone else's life, that I had been there when no one else was. And then that day arrived. I put on my favorite blouse, the one that Ethan Miller always said smelled like cookies. I walked to court as if going to a trial for lost love. Entering the hall, I froze for a moment. His mother was there, with a stern, impenetrable gaze, my son, with his head down, as if he wanted to sink through the floor. And he, Ethan Miller, towering above everyone, with longer hair, but with the same eyes that I saw closing every night on my lap. He wasn't looking at me, or maybe he was, but I couldn't tell. The judge called for silence. I was given the floor, and in a trembling but firm voice, I spoke, from the depths of my soul. I didn't use legal terms, I didn't quote laws, I simply told them what we had been through, how he called me Mom Eleanor Thompson, how he asked me to sing to him before bed, how he hugged me every time he was scared. I told them how I had no strength left when we were separated, how I prayed that he wouldn't forget me. I saw the psychologist crying, and the judge taking notes. I also saw Ethan Miller's mother pursing her lips, and my son avoiding my gaze, but I didn't care about anything except one thing: for him to hear me, for him to know that I had never let him go. In the end, the judge said that he would need a few days to make a decision. I left the hall, not knowing what to think, but as I crossed the corridor, something made me turn around. Ethan Miller, walking behind his mother, stopped for a second. Our eyes met for a moment that seemed like an eternity. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, he just looked at me, as if something inside him was also awakening. And then his mother, like a hawk, grabbed his arm and led him away. But I was no longer the same. I had seen a spark of hope, and that was enough to keep waiting. The days after the hearing dragged on like purgatory. Every phone call made my heart stop, waiting for news from the court. Concentrating, breathing, everything was difficult. I sat for hours by the window, gazing at the horizon, as if the answer was hidden there. I replayed every word spoken in my head over and over again, tormented by the question, was it enough? My truth, my love, could they withstand the malice and resentment of those who wanted to erase me from his life? Never before had I felt so vulnerable, standing on the very edge of an abyss. And then, one Friday morning, the phone finally rang. A dispassionate voice announced the court's decision. The judge had granted limited visitation. I would be able to see Ethan Miller once a month, under supervision, in a neutral location. It wasn't what I had dreamed of, but it was so much more than I had feared. My legs buckled, my hands trembled. I hung up the phone and burst into tears. Not from defeat, from relief. It was a beginning, a thin thread of hope piercing through years of silence and closed doors. Sunday, the day of our first meeting, seemed to drag on forever. I spent the whole week scrubbing the house until it sparkled, even though I knew the meeting wouldn't take place there. I baked banana bread, knowing I wouldn't be able to give it to him. It was as if my body was preparing to receive him, even if only for a few hours. Finally, the day arrived. I went to the community center, opening my soul to him. He was waiting for me, no longer quite a child, but with that same look that once said without words, "I love you." He didn't rush to me, just stood and watched. I slowly approached. "Hello, my boy," I blurted out before I could think. He watched, not answering, but not pulling away either. We sat at a table facing each other, with the social worker a few steps away. I asked how he was doing. He answered briefly, monosyllabically. I told him that his sunflowers were still blooming in the garden, that his bed was untouched, exactly as he had left it. And suddenly, something changed in his eyes. "Did you write me that letter?" he asked. My heart froze in my chest. With eyes full of tears, I nodded, and he, for the first time in years, lowered his head and whispered, "I remember you." That "I remember you" sounded like a crack in the wall that separated us. I was silent, only slowly, as if touching crystal, reached out to his hand. He didn't pull it away. He remained, looking at me with a mixture of doubt and tenderness. And I began to speak. About simple things, about the sweet role we shared, about the teddy bear that still held his scent, about how he once asked permission to move into my bed because he had had a nightmare. I didn't ask questions. I didn't demand explanations, I just wanted to remind him that that love was still alive. Time flew by unnoticed. When the social worker announced that it was time for us to say goodbye, a sharp pain pierced my chest. I didn't want to let him go, but I restrained myself. Calmly getting up, I said that I loved him, that no matter how much time passed, I would always be there. He didn't. He just looked at me, and in his eyes, there was something I couldn't quite decipher. And before leaving, he suddenly stepped towards me and hugged me. It was quick, awkward, almost shy, but it was a hug, a real hug. And that gesture, however insignificant it seemed, restored my soul. Returning home, I sat on his bed, where the blue blanket with stars still lay. I stroked the pillow, as if it still held his scent. For the first time in years, I cried not from pain, but from hope. I understood that the road would not be easy, that his mother would continue her war, that my son would probably remain on the sidelines. But I was no longer alone in my memory. He remembered too. And that invisible connection, however weak, still connected us. I was no longer a forgotten grandmother. I was a living part of his story. In the following days, I dedicated myself to writing another letter, not to give it to him right away, but to keep it. I told him what I felt when he hugged me, what it meant to me. I heard that he remembers. I promised not to pressure him, to respect his time, but also never to disappear again. And I ended the letter with a phrase that still makes my heart tremble: sometimes the shortest hugs warm the soul for years. The second meeting was easier. Ethan Miller came with less tense shoulders, as if the fear of intimacy had receded. He greeted me with a simple hello, but this time he looked straight into my eyes. I brought a book that we once read together. The Little Prince. I put it on the table without saying a word, and his eyes lit up for a moment. "You still have it?" he asked. I nodded, smiling. "I never stopped keeping it, just like you." We spent the next hour reading together in silence, as if time had frozen 50 years ago. This gesture opened something between us. He asked if I still lived in the same house. I answered in the affirmative, that everything remained the same. Even his rusty bicycle is still in the yard. "What about my turtle?" he suddenly asked. I chuckled softly. "Shelley is alive and has gotten even fatter." Ethan Miller smiled, and that smile became a real treasure for me, which I carefully hid deep in my heart. For a moment, we ceased to be a grandmother and grandson, separated by law. We were simply ourselves again, the same ones who fell asleep in each other's arms, watching cartoons on Sundays. But it wasn't all so touching. As I was leaving, I noticed his mother waiting for him on the corner of the square. She was talking on the phone with a frown. Seeing Ethan Miller hug me goodbye, she abruptly hung up and swooped down on me like a whirlwind. Grabbing his hand, she gave me a look that stung worse than a scream. "I hope you don't get any ideas," she hissed through her teeth. I didn't answer, just looked at her calmly and said, "This isn't for you or for me, it's for him." She left without another word. That night I realized that I understood that she wasn't going to give up so easily, that her anger wasn't directed at me, but at everything I represented. And yet I wouldn't back down, because my grandson doesn't deserve to grow up believing that love disappears or that those who care about you can be erased as if they never existed. I was determined. Whatever happened, I would keep quiet if necessary, I would keep my distance if forced to, but I would always be there. With each visit, Ethan Miller became more and more open. He asked me questions about things that seemed to be piecing together his memory. The blanket he slept with, the games in the yard, the songs I sang to him when he had a fever. He listened to me with an attention that tore at my soul, but I also noticed that he was holding something back. There were long pauses, glances at the floor, moments when he seemed to swallow words he didn't dare to say. I didn't pressure him, I just embraced him with my eyes every time. On one of those visits, he quietly confessed to me that he sometimes saw me in his dreams. "In the dream, you're calling me," he whispered, "but I can't answer. When I wake up, I feel like I've lost something, but I don't understand what." I bit my lip to keep from crying. "Maybe it's just a fragment of the past that wasn't completed properly," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't blame yourself for remembering me. Remembering is also resistance." He didn't answer, just stayed with me in silence, as if his soul needed that peace. After that day, everything seemed to speed up. His mother began to create more and more obstacles to our meetings. She claimed that he was coming back confused, that he was having nightmares, that he didn't want to talk. I knew it was a lie, but the law moved slowly, and she knew it. She filed an appeal to suspend the visitation schedule. Claimed that I was manipulating him emotionally. I was summoned to a new hearing, and here I am again, in this same. In the bleak courtroom, with my heart trembling with anxiety but full of determination, I stood before the judge again. This time I had no material evidence, only words. I told him about the child who burst into my life unexpectedly, about the diapers, vaccinations, first teeth, about how his first drawing depicted a little man with my name. I stated that I was demanding rights not out of whim, but out of consistency. How can someone who was raised in love be dangerous? I asked. And when it seemed that all the words had been spoken, the unthinkable happened. From the back rows, Ethan Miller stood up and asked to speak. When Ethan Miller stood to speak, the silence in the room became so thick that even the judge froze with his pen in his hand. No one expected it. His mother tried to stop him, but the judge raised his hand and said calmly, "If a minor wishes to speak, he has the right to do so." My grandson, squaring his shoulders and looking straight ahead, walked to the center of the room. This was no longer the little boy who cried in my arms. Standing before me was a teenager who had something to say. His words rang out, and I could barely breathe. Quietly, but with firmness in his voice, he said that he didn't understand why he was taken away from me, that his memories of me were the warmest. He talked about banana bread, about songs, about the yard with sunflowers. He said that he didn't want to choose between his mother and me, but that it was unfair to deprive him of the opportunity to see someone who cared for him like a mother when he needed it most. "I don't know everything that happened between the adults," he said. "But I know how I felt with her, and I felt safe. I felt loved." I didn't know whether to cry, rush to him to hug him, or just stand there, thanking the heavens for this miracle. The judge nodded slowly and said that he would take his words into consideration. His mother pressed her lips together fiercely, but said nothing. I realized that something at that moment could no longer be erased. The truth spoken by a son has a different weight. There is no legal argument that could contradict the testimony of a sincere heart. Ethan Miller wasn't defending me. He was reclaiming his right to love without guilt. Leaving the courtroom, I didn't dare approach him. His mother, grabbing his hand, hurriedly led him away without even looking in my direction. But before they disappeared around the corner, he turned and subtly waved to me. It wasn't a goodbye, but a promise, a hint that even though the world was pushing him in another direction, his soul still remembered the way back. And that was enough for me for now. After the hearing, the judge ruled in my favor. The visitation schedule was maintained, and furthermore, with Ethan Miller's consent, meetings outside the community center were permitted. It was like a second wind. I invited him home, having obtained signed permission, and he agreed. Crossing the threshold, he froze in the middle of the room, as if everything here was both familiar and foreign. "It smells the same," he murmured, with a certain hidden tenderness in his voice. I smiled, feeling warmth spread throughout my body. I didn't want to say anything, just let him explore. He peered with wide eyes into every corner, the kitchen, his old room, the yard where we blew bubbles. When he approached the shelf where his drawings were still kept, like treasures, he stopped. He picked one up and whispered, "I thought this was gone." I went to him and told him that I had never thrown anything away, that all his things were here because no one in this house had forgotten him. He froze for a few seconds, and then hugged me tightly, without saying a word. And this time he didn't let go so quickly. We spent the day baking cookies, like before. He helped me mix the dough and decorate it with colorful sprinkles. He asked me if I still had his teddy bear, and when I showed it to him, he almost teared up. He hugged it to his chest, as if reclaiming a lost part of himself. We didn't say much, but every gesture, every look spoke more than 1,000 words. In this silence, full of memories, I suddenly realized, we don't need to recreate the past, it's enough to simply make room for a new encounter, so that love can breathe fully again, without fear. When his mother came to pick him up, she didn't want to get out of the car. The horn of an old 1900s car sounded. Ethan Miller said goodbye to me with a slight smile. "Can I come back next week?" he asked, looking into my eyes. I nodded, holding back tears, a lump rose in my throat. He ran out of the house with a backpack on his back and a teddy bear under his arm, and I remained standing in the doorway, watching life gradually return to me what I loved so much. Not as before, but in a new guise, more fragile, more free, and therefore even more precious. Ethan Miller returned the following week, as promised. This time he came alone, walking from the bus stop. I was waiting for him at the door with a glass of hibiscus tea, like when he was very little. "Remember?" I asked, handing him the drink. He laughed quietly. "I remember the green glass with the flowers." I showed him that I still had it, a little worn, but whole. This shared moment from the past. Our secret language. The one that is not erased by time or distance, but only falls asleep, to awaken and return with new strength. All day we chatted about trivial things, school, friends, favorite songs. He confessed that when anxiety grips him, he closes his eyes and imagines the sound of the windmill in the yard. "That sound calms me down," he said. I didn't even know he kept it in his heart. At that moment, I realized that no matter how far he was carried away from me, I was still inside him, not as a shadow, but as a refuge. And that was already my victory. But he also told me about his mother, about how she gets nervous every time he says my name. He said that they sometimes argue, that she thinks I want to confuse him, fill his head with nonsense. "I just want to have both," he said. "I don't want to choose." And those words broke my heart, because I realized, this love is hurting him too, that I am not the only one paying the price for our meeting, but him as well. This child, still caught between two worlds that should have been taking care of each other. Before leaving, I gave him something I had kept for years, a wooden box with our photos, his drawings, and a letter I wrote to him when he turned 5. "You don't have to read it now," I told him. "But when you do, you'll understand how long I've been waiting for you." He didn't answer, just hugged the box to his chest. And when he left, he was no longer the child returning from nostalgia, but a young man who was beginning to make choices on his own. In this quiet act, I realized that something had profoundly changed forever. Days filled with short visits, messages, phone calls in the evenings, when Ethan Miller told me how he was doing at school. His voice was becoming more and more mature. But it still retained that gentle tone that reminded me of the child I had raised with such love. One evening he called me just to say that he had read my letter. "I cried," he confessed. "I didn't know you were around all this time." "I thought you only remembered me as a baby?" he asked. I replied that I remembered him in every way, as a baby, as a child, as a kindred spirit. He told me that he often argues with his mother. She doesn't understand why he's so drawn to me, why he's so insistent on maintaining a connection. She demands his loyalty, forces him to be silent. But Ethan Miller, for the first time in his life, began to stand up for his boundaries. "I have the right to love her," he declared one day, recounting their conversation to me. These words shook me to the core. I understood what it cost him to say them. In a house where love was conditional, he was learning to love without fear, to call me without guilt, to resist without aggression. But I also realized that I had to preserve this fragile balance. I didn't want him to live with guilt or in tears. So, I started writing him different letters, lighter ones, more about the future than the past. I wrote about new recipes we could cook together, about plants I could teach him to care for, about books he could read. I wanted him to not be tormented by memories but to build a future with me, starting with a clean slate where he didn't have to choose between his mother and me. And then, amidst all of this, the news hit me like a thunderbolt. I was diagnosed with severe hypertension and heart disease. It wasn't immediately critical, but it required constant attention. The doctor was adamant, I should avoid strong emotions. I smiled sadly. How could I achieve that when I lived with an open heart? I didn't want to burden Ethan Miller. Not yet. But I started putting my affairs in order and leaving him writings, not just memories, but a story. Our story. Because if I were to disappear one day, I wanted him to understand clearly, his grandmother never gave up. My health began to deteriorate faster than I expected. Walks left me breathless, and the nights became long and agonizing. Sometimes I would wake up with a racing heart, feeling like my body no longer wanted to endure, but it still continued to write. Every day a page, not only for Ethan Miller but also for myself, because I needed to leave a record of what I had experienced. I didn't want my story to be lost in the silence I had so often been forced to endure. I wanted him to know that his existence had saved me more than once. One Sunday, he came to visit me without warning. He brought a package of sweet bread and smiled shyly. He said that he had argued with his mother again, but this time he wouldn't let it interfere with our meeting. "I don't want to waste any more time," he blurted out. We sat in the yard, between the pots he had helped plant when he was only 3 years old. I showed him how much the new bougainvillea had grown. "It's like you," I told him. It took time for it to bloom, but when it did, it was impossible not to notice it. That evening, I told him about my health, without unnecessary drama, but honestly. He was silent, his head down. "Are you going to die soon?" he asked with the cruel directness typical of teenagers. I replied that I didn't know. But when that day came, I didn't want him to find out about it from someone else. I wanted him to hear it from me personally. "I still have time," I told him. "And as long as I have it, I want to spend it with you." He nodded and hugged me tightly, as if wanting to preserve me in his memory forever. Before leaving, he took a notebook out of his backpack. "I want to write too," he said. "I don't want to forget anything." He showed it to me. On the cover were our initials, C and E, Eleanor Thompson and Ethan Miller. "We'll write our story together." And at that moment, I felt that life, however unfair it might be, was giving me something unique. The opportunity to heal wounds with love, to heal with words what others had destroyed with oblivion. The days with Ethan Miller became a ray of light in a series of increasingly fragile days. He came every weekend, without fail. He brought books, questions, doubts, and, above all, love. He helped me with my medications, with shopping, even with cooking. "I don't want you to get so tired," he said, and as I watched him clumsily chop tomatoes, I could only smile. I never thought I would live to see this moment. The child I raised was now taking care of me. It was like the completion of a circle that had begun with diapers and lullabies. One day, on a rainy afternoon, as we were writing something in his notebook, he suddenly asked, "Are you angry at anyone?" "At whom?" I asked. "At Mom or Dad?" "For everything they did to you." He looked at me with concern. I was silent for a few seconds, gathering my thoughts. "No," I finally replied. "I felt anger. I felt sadness, but I don't hold grudges because if I filled myself with that, I wouldn't have room for my love for you." He looked at me with shining eyes and wrote that sentence in his notebook. "I want to always remember this," he said quietly. And I understood that something inside him was healing too. One night, he confessed to me that he wanted to live with me, that he didn't feel good at home anymore, that there were only quarrels and tension there. My heart was breaking with pain. I wanted to tell him, yes, to pack his things and come, but I couldn't. Legally, I didn't have the right to do that yet, and emotionally, I didn't want to turn him into the villain of this story. I told him that I understood him, that this house would always be his home, but that he should be careful and not make decisions in the heat of anger. I promised that we would fight, but patiently. We sealed this promise with a photo, a blurry selfie where he hugs me from behind, and I laugh like I haven't laughed in many years. We printed it out and glued it to the first page of a notebook. Below, he wrote, "Here begins what no one will take away from us." And, watching him write, I realized that it didn't matter how this story would end, because he already knew the truth, because he no longer looked at me as a shadow of the past, but as a support in his present. A year after that first supervised visit, Ethan Miller turns 14. I baked his favorite Tres Leches cake with cinnamon and decorated the yard with balloons that he helped hang himself. This time, he didn't have to hide or beg for permission amidst screams. His mother, exhausted from fighting the inevitable, coldly accepted his choice. Without tenderness, but at least she stopped interfering. Sometimes, when the heart turns to stone, all we can ask for is that it stop hindering love. That evening, he hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for not giving up." I closed my eyes and let the tears flow, not from sadness, but from relief. I suddenly realized that all the pain, every unanswered letter, every closed door, every morning spent in prayer, it was all worth it. I didn't get back the lost years, but I gained something more, the certainty that true love leaves traces that no one can erase, and that when you truly love, life sooner or later finds a way to fix what is broken. Today I write these lines with trembling hands, but with a peaceful soul. The body remains fragile, the steps shorter, but I am no longer afraid. Ethan Miller visits me at every opportunity, because there is no longer confusion in his eyes, only a fleeting bewilderment, immediately replaced by all-consuming love. He takes my hand with the same unwavering confidence with which, as a 3-year-old, he clung to my skirt. There are no more formal papers between us, no more grandmother-grandson conventions. We are two souls who have stood up to oblivion, two souls who have decided to meet at all costs, no matter what. And if one day my heart decides to stop forever, I will not leave with sadness. I will leave knowing that I was loved, that I was remembered, that I was recognized. I was not invisible. The child I nurtured with my soul never left me until the end. And I never let him go either, neither in separation, nor in silence, nor in oblivion. Because raising is not always giving birth. Raising is staying. And I stayed.